Hey, welcome to the tutorial on this button clicker app. We're about third part in, and we are going to change these buttons on the screen from static buttons into clickable buttons. So when we left off, we had this grid of buttons that we had figured out that we could do as random values. And every time we refresh the page, the button values are reassigned some random value, either true or false. As you can see, I can't click on anything to make any changes, but that's what we're going to fix. In order to make these images clickable, we're going to turn them into buttons and then have an event listener with those. So let's start here about line 24, where we draw the images. So what I would like to do is to have a button tag that starts before it and goes beyond it. So let's see, I'll cut and paste. So now the button should show up as an image button. So the button will have an image inside it. Now you notice the razor syntax is changed. As soon as I have an HTML tag and I switch back into razor, I must put in the @ symbol. So there we have it. Okay, so we're going to surround this image with a button. Now the button needs some types. So let's say type equals. And what are the choices? So we can have just a generic button, which would be programmable with JavaScript, a reset button, which is supposed to set the form, or what we want here is a submit button, which will send a message to the server. So we also need a value and a name. So the name of the button is, let's call it mine. So let's pretend we're getting to the Minesweeper app, and each one of these represents a mine on the screen. We could call it name equals on-off switch, or it doesn't really matter what you choose, but if you choose mine here, you're going to remember later that it's mine in another location. Okay, what's its value? So let's set this as the value of the button, so the number of the button. Well, what is the number of the button? So we are going with a loop here that has the number I, or the letter I as the value. So in here, I am going to, instead of put a string, I'm going to put an @ symbol, and it allows me to use the letter I. So every button will have a number from 0 to 24. All right, so now I have a button, but now a button needs to have a form. So this is a type submit, and we're expecting a form to be submitted. And as you can see on the code, I don't have form anywhere listed yet. So we'll add that now. So just before we begin the for loop, we're going to add a new form. So I'm going to use something called @using. And then inside of there, we're going to have a new HTML form. So let's do an @HTML dot, and we're looking for begin form. And the begin form needs to have a couple of parameters. So we're going to include the new event. We're going to call this thing handle button click. And then the next parameter is going to be the name of the controller. The name of the controller is listed over here as button controller right here. So that controller, oops, come back, is the name here for button. Now we have some issues here, so let's add a new bracket. And then we'll have to move all of this item here. I'm going to cut it and paste it inside. So now we have ourselves a begin form using this block here, and the button clicks will submit the form. So now let's go create the method for handle the button click. So the form click will be handled by this method. Well, this method doesn't exist yet, so let's copy this string here and let's put it into our button controller. So let's come into the controller here, and let's see, the first method is right here for index. The next one is called, we're going to do handle button click. So let's give it its attributes here. So it is going to be returning an action result, just like the previous. And then the handle the button click. Now remember, we are expecting a value to come back called mine. So that is the string that will be submitted from the form. Now, what is wrong here? It says you haven't returned anything. So we're going to return, just like we did before, we're going to return the value of our buttons, and we'll send it to the index. What's the matter? I can't spell. Result. Okay, that looks good. So there we have it. So we have a handle button click, and we're expecting the mine. We're going to return the view and show us the buttons. Now I think this will not work because the value of buttons might not be initialized, but let's see what happens. Okay, so I have an error. It says here you've got an @ symbol where you don't need one. I think we did this before. So it says you don't need to put @ if you are continuing on with Razor code. So another error, we'll fix that. Let's go back into index. So I don't need the @ symbol here. Let's go ahead and run it again. All right, this time you can see that we have a page with a bunch of buttons on it. Before I click anything, let's go ahead and inspect the page and see what came out. So we do have a form action, and we are going to the /button/handle button click, and it's a post method. So inside of here we got all these buttons, and you can see that their name is all mine and their values are from 0 to 24. So that's what the code looks like. Let's go ahead and click one and see what happens. So I'm going to click this guy here, the third one, and everything disappears. So why did they all disappear? I didn't expect them to disappear. Let's refresh the page. They're still gone. So something happened to my array of buttons. Let's go back into the controller and see what may have gone wrong. So I initialize the buttons here, and then when the page first loads, I create them. Well, when I come down to here, I see that buttons is probably undefined. It has not been initialized. To fix that, I could either copy this code and recreate them all randomly, but that would lose their initial value. A better choice is to put the keyword static in front of the list. And what putting static does here is it keeps this value the same throughout the operation of the program. So let's try that again. All right, so I have a new set of buttons. If I click them this time, the page refreshes. If you notice closely, the page does refresh. The buttons don't change, they just are redisplayed. So now I'm going to put some code in to make them change. So let's go back into the handle button click. So I want to modify the state of the button that was clicked. So I'm going to create an integer value and I'll name it button number. So this will be the number of the button that was clicked. Now we have a string called mine, which is a value from 0 to 24. Well, I can't use a string here. I want to have an integer. So the class that I'm looking for is called int32. And then I can put in the word parse. And inside of there, we can parse the value of the mine. So this should give us a number from 0 to 24. So if I want to access the certain button that's in there, I can have buttons, square bracket, button number, and now I want to modify the state. What do I want it to be? Well, since this is a button click handler, that means if I've clicked this button, I want it to switch to the opposite. So if it was false, let's make it true. If it's true, let's make it false. So the easiest way to do that, instead of writing a bunch of if statements, is to negate. Let's put the exclamation mark, and then I am going to copy and paste the code that was gone before. So this should switch the state of one button, and then we're going to send it back to the same form for redisplay. All right, so we have the grid of buttons again. Now when I click a button, you can see that it switches from true to false and false to true. So this is a good starting point for your game. If you think about creating Minesweeper, you're going to have a bunch of buttons and we'll change their state whenever we click them. Now there is a problem that updating the entire web page is a waste of bandwidth and materials. We only really need to update one little part of the web page, but that's for another lesson in a section called Ajax, where we do partial page updates. But for right now, we have gotten to the point where we have created a button page and we can select the value of true or false for every single button. All right, it's time for another challenge. So in the last part of this video, I'm going to ask you to modify the buttons, or better yet, make a new page based on a different button. So your goal is to create a grid of buttons, but instead of only showing 2 states, I'd like you to have 3 or more. And then each time you click the button, it'll animate to another state. So you can reach the last state, they will go back to the first. So you're going to have multiple states of a button. Now, what kind of ideas would you put for your buttons? So look at some of these pictures here. These are called sprite sheets, and if you search Google Images, you can get sprite sheets where you have a slightly different picture for every frame. So these sheets show soldiers and video game characters, so you could do something like that. You could have a slight change of your button to have 3 states, but the idea is that instead of just a true-false item, we're going to have an integer value for the state of the button, and as you click it, it will cycle through. So that's some extra practice and some challenge for you to figure out. So go see what you can do with multiple state buttons.